two questions on that. So the reason why I ask you about getting how did you get the people that you work with on those projects, like those families, to open up, was because we usually have, not usually, but sometimes we have a hard time talking to our guests because they don't seem to want to open up. So they're professors or students or people. So do you have any?
Well, let me give you. Well, as you may notice, I can sit here and talk about anything for any length of time, and be responsive, and even volunteer information that you haven't asked. So, in interacting with the adolescent parents, and with their parents, was very easy for me. And sit down in the living room, talk. Eventually, during the project, I would take everybody out for multiple meals on my expense account at the Washington Post, the parents and the children in the family. So that they would look forward to that, because they really had that opportunity to go out and eat in a restaurant, because that's how tight things were in the budget. So I remember one parent, Tasha's stepfather, said to me, "Boy, you have an American Express Gold Card." Now, I didn't realize the significance of that. To me, it was just a tool to do the work that I'm doing, but to him, it was a big deal. And it sort of surprised me. If I had known he was going to have that reaction, I never would have used some other credit card, for paying for the meal. Right? So all I needed was a receipt to get reimbursed by the Washington Post. So any card would have done. So you become aware of, and I never lorded over people. Both the parents and the teenagers saw me as a middle-class black male who worked for the Washington Post. And he's come here because he thinks adolescent childbearing is a crisis. And they didn't see it as a crisis, as an urban crisis. So I don't know what to tell you. I got along with the 6 families. I developed a very good rapport with all of them. And it didn't matter. Whenever I showed up, the teenagers are notorious for not keeping time and not keeping schedules. And I'd make an appointment with one of the teenagers, and I'd show up at the house, and that teenager wasn't there at that time. But one other family member was there, and I said, "What are you doing?" And they'd say, "I'm not doing anything." "Well, come on with me. So-and-so's not here, but I'll take you to dinner or take you to lunch. Let's go to Red Lobster, get some shrimp." And they said, "Oh yeah, okay." So it didn't matter who was home, because I was interviewing everyone in the family, multiple times. Well, let me add this too. I developed a system of interviewing that was multiple interviews. I started the first interview with parents and every child in the family. I started the first interview with, "What is your earliest childhood memory attending school?" Figuring that was a relatively neutral area to begin in. Then the second interview would be a day or two later. "What is your earliest childhood memory growing up in your family?" Then the third interview would be, "What is your earliest childhood memory being introduced to religion? Or if not religion, a worldview or an ethical view?" And then the fourth interview would be, "What is your earliest childhood memory growing up outside the family?" And the most important section in there was your adolescence, when you became sexually aware, interested in boys, interested in girls. When you would react to peer pressure. And at the end of that interview, I would have a sense of whether you were a conformist or non-conformist, whether you could be easily manipulated by peer pressure, or peer pressure was very important to you, or wasn't important to you. And after I do those 4 interviews, then the real interview begins. Because now I have a construction of this person in 4 areas, 4 very important areas of their lives. The 2 most important of the 4 areas was growing up in the family, growing up outside the family. But I had to do the school history and the church or religion history to complete the whole. And then after that, I follow that with focus interviews. Now, generally, not all the time, but classically, between the 3rd and the 4th interview, the person began to contradict what they told me in interviews 1 and 2. Yeah. And then I wouldn't indicate that I was focusing in on the contradictions, and I wouldn't call them contradictions. And I wouldn't say to them, that's not what you told me 2 weeks ago, you know. I would listen carefully and say, aha. Because I saw the contradiction as the person being
more open,
more willing to tell me something closer to the truth. Mm-hmm. So I teach this type of interviewing here now. And as I tell my students, you never get anybody to tell you the absolute truth. People who've been married 100 years don't tell each other the absolute truth. That's how they're able to remain married for 100 years. So keep that in mind when you marry. But you want something closer to the truth, something that's not very flattering. When people begin telling you things about themselves that are not very flattering, then you really know you've made a breakthrough. Yeah. And so then I do multiple interviews after those 4 structured interviews that are focused on the contradictions that they've shared with me. But I never referred to them. I said, you know, I was very interested in what you said the other day about so-and-so and so-and-so, and how you don't get along with your stepfather. Let's talk a little more about that. Because something came out in maybe the 3rd session when we were talking about religion, that the person indicated he or she didn't like the stepfather. And that was part of the reason. I don't know if they offered it as a rationale for becoming pregnant or part of their defiance. One young adult woman, she was not a teenager when I interviewed her in the project, but she had a child when she was 14. And she had intentionally gotten pregnant to show her mother that her mother's choke chain on her social life wouldn't work. And that was a 14-year-old adolescent. It's a child's decision. But she got pregnant and was happy she was pregnant because her mother had her on a choke chain, trying to keep her from getting pregnant.
I think the key here is just time. And
time is a big element.
Yeah.
Time and patience.
Yeah.
Patience, particularly when you know people are lying to you. Mm-hmm. Let's take Sharita Grant, for example. I'm still in touch with her. We exchange messages every week on Facebook. She's now a grandmother, but when I met her, she was 17 and she had been a mother for 3 years. Had her first child when she was 15. And then I attended her wedding when she married when she was 20. And then she had 2 daughters with her husband, and then she and her husband divorced. And she raised the 2 girls on her own. She had a young boy, Marquise. When I interviewed her, she was living with her stepmother and her 2 sisters, 2 half-sisters by her father. And her older sister, Patricia, sat in on the interview. She sat in the living room on my left in an overstuffed chair. And I was interviewing Sharita at the dining room table in the stepmother's apartment. And I was taking the mother through the school. I was taking Sharita through the school history. I took her through year by year. And when we got to the 7th grade, Sharita started talking about this course she had in human sexuality. And of course, this was not available to me when I was a student in 7th grade. So I was paying close attention to what she had to say. Now, she had told me that her mother had never told her anything about human sexuality. She got pregnant by her boyfriend, William Wheeler, when she was 15, and when she was 14, and she had the baby when she was 15, and he abandoned her. And she was totally ignorant about anything about birth control or human sexuality until she began having sex with her boyfriend. So we're going through her school history year by year, and she lost sight of what she had already told me. Mm. And when we got to the 7th grade, she started telling me about this course on human sexuality at junior high school. I'm trying to think of the name of the junior high school. I lost again. And she told me all the details that she learned in this course, including every form of birth control. The teachers were very explicit with all of the students because they were working against teenage pregnancy in this very poor community. And so I listened to all of it very carefully, and then I said very quietly to her, and the tape recorder was going. I said, so when you got pregnant 4 years later, you knew what you were doing. And suddenly she realized that she had uncovered herself inadvertently. She had lied to me about how she became pregnant. She became pregnant out of ignorance. And here she was telling me that 4 years before she got pregnant, she knew everything about human sexuality and birth control. She didn't know what to do. And so she hit her head and turned her face to the wall and hid her face from me, right? I just sat there quietly. Her older sister, Pat, fell on the floor laughing because Pat knew the truth. And it had been so easy to unmask Sharita. And Sharita composed herself, then turned around and looked at me with a straight face and said, no, when I got pregnant, I had forgotten everything. And I said, oh, okay. So let's move on to the 8th grade. That was the way she wanted to handle it. I had to wait till she was ready to tell me the truth. I didn't badger her or try to get it out of her. But now I knew that she hadn't gotten pregnant out of ignorance.